Hello and welcome to Dreams of the Past. Imagine standing on a quiet beach in the Aegean Sea. The air tastes of salt and sleep. The moon hangs low, and somewhere beneath these waves lies a story the world has almost forgotten. The Aegean Sea at night has a kind of magic that words barely catch. It's not loud, not stormy, just the steady hush of water against rock, like the planet breathing in its sleep. Fishermen are long gone. The lights from their boats now dots on the horizon. You can almost hear the heartbeat of history itself. People have always stared at the ocean and felt something pull at them. It's not just curiosity, it's something deeper, older. Maybe it's because we all came from the sea once. Maybe it's because we know that beneath that endless surface, there are secrets, and maybe even answers, waiting. Tonight, our story begins here, where myth and memory share the same tide. We're not just chasing a legend, we're visiting a dream that refuses to die. The lost world of Atlantis. Now, before you picture flying crystal pyramids and underwater UFOs, take a breath. This isn't that kind of story. This is a quieter one, a bedtime journey through history, science, and imagination. We'll wander the same paths Plato once walked when he told the tale that would haunt humankind for over 2,000 years. Atlantis, you see, isn't just a place on a map. It's an idea, a mirror we hold up to ourselves. Every civilization, at some point, dreams of Atlantis, and fears becoming it. The ocean does strange things to the mind. It looks endless, but it's heavy with memory. Every wave has touched something ancient. Every current passes over forgotten worlds. Somewhere down there could be marble pillars, mosaic floors, or maybe nothing at all, just sand that remembers. We tell stories about these lost places because we need them. They remind us that nothing, not even empires, lasts forever. They also whisper that maybe, just maybe, some things do survive. Ideas, myths, warnings. You know, sometimes I imagine the first person who ever told the story of Atlantis sitting by a fire, looking out at the dark sea, and saying, you know what, there's definitely something down there. And everyone else probably nodded, half scared, half curious. Because who's going to argue with the ocean? We humans are funny like that. We make legends out of silence. Give us a little mystery, and we'll build a whole city out of it. Think of all the nights sailors have drifted across this same water, staring at the moon's reflection, wondering what lies beneath. Think of the fishermen who've pulled up bits of pottery from the seafloor and whispered to each other, "It's from the old ones." Those whispers become myths. Myths become histories. And history, if you're lucky, becomes a bedtime story. So tonight, if you stay with me, we'll look for Atlantis. Not the cartoon version, but the one that feels real enough to touch. We'll explore how a single story from ancient Greece shaped explorers, dreamers, and scientists for millennia. We'll visit islands where the earth still trembles with volcanic heartbeats, and we'll drift through time, from Plato's scrolls to modern sonar scans, listening for the echoes of a civilization that may have once stood right here, beneath this calm sea. By the end, you might not find a lost city, but you might find something else. A little piece of wonder that makes you see the ocean differently. The ocean hides things, but it also reveals. Sometimes it takes centuries, but it always tells the truth, in its own slow language. Maybe Atlantis isn't lost at all. Maybe it's just waiting for the right kind of silence to speak again. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The faint hum of history under the waves. It's not loud or dramatic, it's gentle, persistent, like the world remembering itself. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, feels familiar because it's the story of every civilization that ever was, including ours. We rise, we build, we shine. And then, the tide comes in. But there's beauty in that cycle. The ruins become reefs, the stories become songs, the end becomes the beginning again. That's the heartbeat of this series, finding calm in the fall of empires, comfort in the rhythm of time. And now, as the moon drifts higher over the water, let's travel back, farther than memory, back to the philosopher who first gave Atlantis a name. He didn't dive into the sea to find it. He built it with words, on parchment, in candlelight 2,000 years ago. Next we meet Plato, the dreamer who turned a city that never existed into the most famous city the world has ever imagined. The waves fade behind us now. In their place, the flicker of a candle. You can almost smell the ink and parchment. We've left the shore of the Aegean and stepped into the mind of a man who dreamed a city so real, the world still looks for it today. His name was Plato, and he didn't find Atlantis, he imagined it. What if the greatest lost city in history was never meant to be found? What if it was a lesson, wrapped in myth, written as a warning? Tonight we open Plato's book and listen to the dream that started it all. Picture Athens around 360 BC. The city hums with debate, olive oil lamps glowing through narrow streets. Somewhere inside a quiet study, a student named Critias leans in close while his teacher Plato tells a story unlike any other. A tale about a mighty island empire that rose beyond the pillars of Heracles. What we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was vast, rich, powerful, and proud. Too proud. According to Plato, the gods punished Atlantis for its arrogance. In a single day and night, the island sank into the sea and was gone forever. Simple story, right? Except somehow, it never really went away. Now, Plato wasn't trying to be a travel blogger for the ancient world. He wasn't drawing treasure maps. He was teaching a moral lesson, one about balance, virtue, and human pride. In Timaeus and Critias, he described Atlantis as the perfect warning tale, a civilization with advanced technology, wealth, and culture, but no humility. In the end, their own brilliance became their downfall. Atlantis wasn't meant to make you pack your bags, it was meant to make you think. And that's the beauty of Plato's writing. His stories sound like history, but they feel like mirrors. Every generation that reads him ends up seeing a reflection of itself. But here's where things get interesting, maybe even a little mischievous. Plato claimed the story wasn't his invention. He said he got it from an old Egyptian priest who told it to Solon, one of Greece's legendary lawgivers, 100 years earlier. Solon supposedly brought the story home, and it eventually reached Plato through family tales. Sounds like a chain of whispers across time. And you know how whispers go. They grow, they twist, they turn into something else. That's how myths evolve, they breathe. So now we have a puzzle. Was Plato really passing on ancient memory? Or did he create the perfect illusion of one? Was Atlantis a parable? Or a memory dressed as one? Here's what makes Plato brilliant. He wrote his myths like architecture. Every line is a stone placed with intent. He gave Atlantis details. Mountains, rivers, elephants, a shining city ringed by canals. It wasn't vague like most legends, it felt possible. And once something feels possible, it's almost impossible to let go of. If you've ever read a story that made you think, wait, this could have happened, then you understand exactly why Atlantis stuck. Plato planted just enough truth to make you wonder, and that wonder has lasted 2,000 years. Now, to be fair, if Plato were alive today, he'd probably be exhausted. Imagine logging into social media and finding out half the planet is digging up beaches looking for your metaphor. He might sigh and say, it was a moral story, not a Google map. Then again, he might smile, because that curiosity, that human need to find, is exactly what he wrote about. Atlantis wasn't about the ocean, it was about us. Plato used it to show how power and perfection can corrupt, how every great empire walks a fine line between glory and ruin. He wanted readers to ask, are we next? That question, it turns out, never goes out of style. Every empire since has looked over its shoulder and seen Atlantis waiting, a reminder that even marble crumbles under the tide of time. When we dream of Atlantis, we're dreaming of our best and worst selves, what we build, what we break, and what we hope will be remembered. Maybe that's why the story still feels so alive, because deep down, every one of us fears being forgotten, drowned beneath the waves of time. And that's what makes Atlantis such a perfect bedtime story. It comforts us with beauty and warns us with truth, all in the same breath. So we've heard Plato's dream, a tale woven from wisdom and warning. But what came before him? Where did that dream begin? In the next chapter, we drift further back, into the age of legends, to the world before maps, before borders. When every culture carried its own flood, its own golden age, its own Atlantis, Plato's candle fades, and the light returns to the sea. The scrolls roll shut, the ink dries, and the philosopher's dream drifts away into the dark. But long before he ever put ink to parchment, there were already stories of lost worlds, drowned lands, and floods that swallowed the earth whole. You see, Plato didn't invent Atlantis out of thin air. He just gave an old human memory, a name. Have you ever noticed how every culture, no matter how far apart, tells the same story? A great flood, a golden age, a fall from grace. Different names, different gods, but the same rhythm. What if all those legends were pieces of one long memory, scattered like broken tiles from a forgotten mosaic? Before the Greeks, before the pyramids, there were the Sumerians. They told tales of a hero named Ziusudra, or Utnapishtim, if you prefer the Babylonian remix, who survived a great flood sent by the gods to wash away human arrogance. Sound familiar? Yes, it's basically Noah, the early access edition. Across the desert, the Egyptians spoke of a time when the Nile rose higher than the temples, when gods punished men for greed and pride. In India, the ancient Mahabharata whispered of cities swallowed by the sea. And the Greeks? They told of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who floated in a wooden chest until the waters fell, and the world began anew. Floods upon floods, ages upon ages, the same melody played in 1,000 tongues. Why do we all remember this? Maybe it's because floods were the first real apocalypse. To ancient eyes, a single wave could erase a lifetime of work. Whole valleys could vanish overnight. Our ancestors didn't have weather apps, just instincts and fear. When the ocean rose, it wasn't science, it was judgment. And somewhere deep down we remember. Not the details maybe, but the feeling. That chill when nature reminds us who's boss. But there's another kind of story that walks beside the flood. The tale of the Golden Age. You know the one. When life was perfect, God strolled among men, and everything glowed a little warmer. The Greeks called it the Age of Kronos. The Chinese had the Shangri-La. The Persians spoke of Aegean Sea, the first paradise. And in each of them, paradise ends the same way. Humanity changes, pride grows, the balance breaks, and the world resets. Atlantis fits right in. Not just a city that fell, but a memory of when the world was better. Maybe we tell these stories not to mourn what was lost, but to remind ourselves what we could be again. And honestly, the ancients had style. Their end-of-the-world stories weren't subtle. Today we worry about inflation and Wi-Fi. They worried about being personally smited by Poseidon. If you overslept your prayer offering, that might have been the end of civilization. Talk about pressure. But even with all that drama, there's something comforting about it. Because these stories tell us, even when the world ends, life finds a way back. The flood always recedes. Someone always survives to tell the tale. Modern scientists sometimes call myths cultural memory. That's a fancy way of saying stories are our brain's backup drive. They store information about real disasters, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, droughts, hidden inside poetry and fable. The flood myth, for example, could echo ancient sea level rise after the Ice Age. When the glaciers melted, the coastlines drowned. Villages vanished, and the people who escaped told their children, the gods took the land. By the time those children grew old, it wasn't geology anymore. It was mythology. Atlantis might be the ultimate remix of all those old memories. A single story that gathered whispers from Sumer, Egypt, Crete, and beyond. Plato gave it a name, but humanity gave it a heartbeat. Every time we rebuild after disaster, a city, a home, a life, we become a little like Atlantis ourselves. We rise again knowing the tide will one day return. And yet we build anyway. That's the human part of the myth. So when you think about Atlantis, don't imagine a single island. Think of it as 1,000 memories pressed into one. It's the story of every civilization that ever stood too close to the water. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it still haunts us. Because deep down, we all come from the same place, the edge of the sea. And we all carry that quiet question. What happens when the tide comes for us? The myths spread like ripples across time until they reach the Aegean itself, a sea full of islands, volcanoes, and secrets waiting below. If Atlantis ever had a home, this would be it. Next, we dive beneath those blue waters to meet a real civilization that rose and fell, one that might just have written its own chapter in the legend of Atlantis. Join me as we drift beneath the Aegean blue. The stories of floods and golden ages fade into the sound of the sea again. But this time we're not listening from the shore. We're floating above it, above the deep, quiet waters of the Aegean. Somewhere below, between Greece and Crete, lies a place that may hold more truth about Atlantis than any dusty scroll ever could. This is where history and legend finally meet, beneath the Aegean blue. Imagine diving beneath these calm waters and finding streets paved with marble, walls of ash, and houses frozen in time. No imagination needed. We found them. Not a fantasy, not a fable. A real city, destroyed in a single night of fire and sea. Sound familiar? Yeah, it should. The Aegean isn't just beautiful. It's alive. Volcanoes sleep under its waves. Islands drift above ancient craters, and coastlines hide the bones of forgotten ports. This sea has a short memory for the living, but a long one for the dead. Every island here has a story. Some are about gods, some about kings, and some about the earth itself losing its temper. And in the middle of it all lies one of the most important clues to the Atlantis mystery. The island of Santorini, once known as Thera. Today, Santorini is a postcard. Blue domes, white walls, sunsets that could make poets cry. But 3,600 years ago it was something else entirely. A thriving island with a glittering city, paved streets, multi-storey homes, and colourful wall paintings. A people who traded with Egypt, Crete and the Levant. They built with confidence, as if the earth itself was solid beneath them. Spoiler, it wasn't. One quiet day the island began to shake. The ground split, the sky turned red, and then in a moment that must have looked like the wrath of the gods, the mountain in the island's centre exploded. Not a small eruption, this was one of the biggest in recorded history. A blast so powerful it tore the island into pieces, sent tsunamis racing across the Mediterranean, and dropped ash on lands hundreds of miles away. Scientists say it released more energy than hundreds of atomic bombs combined. But to the people who lived here, it wasn't science, it was the end of the world. When archaeologists first dug into the ruins at Akrotiri, on Santorini's southern edge, they found an entire city preserved under layers of volcanic ash. Walls, furniture, even staircases still standing. It looked eerily similar to another famous site, Pompeii. But Akrotiri was older, much older. No skeletons, no signs of panic. Just a city quietly abandoned before the eruption, as if its people had heard the warning in time. They might have sailed away, vanishing into history like ghosts, and their city waited 3.5 millennia to be found again. Now tell me if this sounds familiar. A great island civilization, rich, artistic and powerful, suddenly destroyed by fire and flood in a single night. Its people gone, its memory turned to legend. That's not just a myth, that's Thera. If Plato had been alive in the centuries after this eruption, maybe he would have called it something else. Maybe he would have called it Atlantis. Of course, we can't say for sure that Santorini is Atlantis, but if you're looking for a real event that could have inspired the story, this is a strong contender. It's as if history left us a message written in ash. Yes, something like that did happen once. Now imagine being one of those ancient locals. You wake up, have your morning bread, maybe complain about taxes, and then, boom, the entire island decides to rearrange itself. That's a bad day at work, no matter the century. But what fascinates me isn't just the destruction, it's what they built before it. Art filled with colour, trade that stretched across the sea, architecture that could rival modern towns. These people weren't primitive, they were brilliant. And when their world ended, it left behind not chaos but silence. The kind of silence that makes you lean closer. Beneath the Aegean, the sea still hums softly over those ruins. It's strange to think, a whole civilization may rest just a few metres below the gentle sway of waves where tourists swim today. The ocean doesn't brag about what it keeps. It just holds it all, patiently. When you look out over Santorini's caldera, you're staring straight into the heart of that ancient volcano. It's like looking into time itself. Beautiful still, but carrying the memory of fire. Atlantis or not, the story of Thera reminds us how thin the line between greatness and fragility really is. A single eruption, a single night, and centuries of progress vanished. But it also shows us something hopeful. That even after the worst happens, the world rebuilds. The sea closes over the scars, and the story waits for someone new to tell it. Maybe that's why we keep coming back to these myths. Because deep down, we know that everything, even us, is temporary. But the stories we leave behind, those might just last forever. We've seen the sea take a world. Now let's meet the people who once ruled it. In the next chapter, we sail to Crete, home of palaces, labyrinths, and the first great civilization of Europe. A world of beauty and brilliance that may have passed its fire to Atlantis itself. Next stop, the Minoans, Europe's first great civilization. We sail south now, leaving the fractured island of Santorini behind. The sea is calm tonight, the kind of calm that almost feels suspicious, like the world's holding its breath. Ahead of us lies Crete, a great island, warm and green, where mountains rise out of mist and the wind smells faintly of thyme and old stone. This was the home of a people who built palaces before most of Europe had even built villages. They were artists, traders, storytellers, and for centuries they ruled the waves. Tonight we meet the Minoans. Imagine a civilization so advanced that its plumbing worked better than some modern hotels. A people who worshipped nature, loved beauty, and seemed to have little interest in war. No swords carved in stone, no tales of conquest. Just colour, life, and art. Who are these mysterious islanders who rose from the sea and then disappeared just as suddenly? Our ship drifts into the harbour at Knossos, the jewel of the Minoan world. Picture it in its prime. A vast palace of red columns and white walls painted with dolphins and lilies, built on a hillside, like a maze of dreams. It wasn't just a palace, it was a city in itself. 4 stories high, with light wells, drainage systems and frescoes bursting with colour. And at its heart, not a throne room of power, but courtyards for festivals and feasts. The Minoans lived for celebration. They painted dancing girls, leaping bulls, and spiralling patterns that seem to move even now, thousands of years later. Their world looked alive, flowing, not rigid. Art was everywhere, and so was peace. Here's the thing, most ancient art shows war, gods, or fear. Minoan art? It shows joy. People laughing, harvesting, diving, painting the sea in bright blues. They worshipped a goddess of nature, a mother of all living things. Their temples weren't fortresses, they were open courtyards under the sky. Even their script, Linear A, looks elegant, like the writing itself was made to dance. You get the feeling they were doing something rare for the ancient world. They were enjoying life. The Minoans were born from water. Their navy ruled the Aegean, not through conquest but through trade. Their ships carried olive oil, wine and art across the Mediterranean, from Egypt to Spain. Some say they even reached beyond the Pillars of Heracles into the Atlantic. Their island Crete was perfectly placed, the bridge between continents. Every port was a gateway, every voyage a story. If you squint at a map of the Minoan world, you can almost see the outline of Plato's Atlantis, a sea people, rich, cultured, confident, and destined to fall. And let's be honest, they were a little extra. They decorated everything. Floors, walls, even staircases were art. Imagine going over for dinner and realising the plates match the frescoes, which match the pottery, which match your host's robe. Pinterest would have loved them. But all that beauty came from balance, between sea and land, man and nature. They didn't build great armies or walls because, well, why fight when you can trade? Of course, every great civilization leaves behind a myth. For the Minoans, that myth was the labyrinth. The story of King Minos and the Minotaur. According to legend, Minos ruled from Knossos, when his queen gave birth to a half-man, half-bull creature. Long story. Zeus was involved as usual. Minos built a labyrinth beneath the palace to imprison it. Each year, Athens had to send 7 boys and 7 girls as sacrifice until Theseus came and killed the beast. Now, archaeologists haven't found a literal labyrinth. But if you've ever looked at a map of Knossos with its endless corridors and stairways, you'll understand why the story stuck. The palace was a labyrinth, a beautiful one. For nearly 1,000 years, the Minoans flourished. Then, around 1450 BC, something changed. Some say it was invasion, the rising Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. Others think it was nature again, the aftershocks of the great eruption at Thera that darkened the skies and poisoned the seas. Whatever it was, their world began to fade, palaces burned, trade routes shifted, and soon the music of the Minoans went silent. Only the echoes remained, their art, their myths, and the sea that still carries their name. Sound familiar? A peaceful island civilization, advanced beyond its time, brought low by fire, flood, or both. Plato may never have heard the word Minoan, but their memory lingered in Greek imagination. To later storytellers, they were the lost island of the wise, the civilization swallowed by pride and nature's power, Atlantis reborn in memory. It's strange, isn't it? We remember the Minoans not for conquest, but for creativity. Not for what they destroyed, but for what they built. Maybe that's the real lesson of Atlantis. That the greatest civilizations aren't measured by their empires, but by their art, and by the peace they leave behind. But their story isn't over yet, because the same volcano that helped shape their greatness also sealed their fate. In the next chapter, we relive the day the sky turned red, when fire met the sea and history became legend. Join me in chapter 6, when fire met the sea. We've seen the Minoans at their height, peaceful, creative, golden. But even golden ages cast shadows. Sometimes the end of a world doesn't come with war or invasion. It comes quietly, like a storm that begins with a single tremor beneath your feet. And one morning, on a bright island called Thera, that tremor arrived. What would it sound like if the earth itself took a deep breath and then screamed? That's what the people of Thera heard. The day fire met the sea. It probably began the way disasters always do, with ordinary moments. A fisherman mending nets, a potter brushing red paint onto a vase, children laughing in the courtyards, the smell of olives drifting through the warm air. No one knew the mountain beneath them was stirring, restless after centuries of sleep. Small tremors came first, the kind you might blame on a strong wind or an angry god having a bad day. But then came more, longer, louder. Dogs barked, water sloshed from clay jars. The ground began to hum like a living thing. In the port of Akrotiri, the sea pulled back, far back, exposing the seabed like an open wound. Fish flopped helplessly on the sand. Some people ran to collect them. Others watched the horizon darken. Then, without warning, the mountain split open. What came next must have felt like the sky itself collapsing. A thunder so deep it shook the soul. Columns of ash clawed their way into the heavens. The sea boiled near the shore, and then came the fire. Red and white, molten rivers carving through the island, turning day into night. Within hours, the eruption had shattered the island. Half of Thera simply vanished. The centre collapsed into the sea, forming the massive crater we see today. The Santorini caldera. If you stand there now, gazing across that blue circle of water, you're looking into the mouth of that ancient disaster, the world's quietest monument to one of its loudest days. For the people who lived there, it must have been beyond comprehension. Imagine standing on the shore, watching your island tear itself apart. Ash raining down, lightning flashing inside clouds of smoke, the air thick with sulphur and fear. And yet, there's something strangely beautiful in it too. Nature creating and destroying in the same breath. Fire meeting water, birth and death, all at once. You can almost hear the ocean whisper, "This is how legends begin." When the island fell, the sea fought back. Walls of water raced across the Aegean, smashing into Crete and the coasts beyond. Ships were lifted like toys. Towns swept clean in moments. The Minoans, masters of the sea, were caught off guard by their own element. Archaeologists have found traces of those waves, sand and marine fossils buried inland, far from any beach. It's as if the ocean left its calling card on every shore it touched. After the eruption, the sky darkened. For days, maybe weeks, sunlight was just a rumour. Ash fell like snow over the islands, covering crops, poisoning rivers. Even in Egypt, records speak of strange sunsets and failed harvests. The echo of Thera's fury, carried by the winds. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The mountain went silent. The sea closed its wound. And the world tried to pretend nothing had happened. But memory, as we've learned, has a way of surviving. Centuries later, people would tell stories of a mighty island destroyed in one night. An empire swallowed by the sea for its pride. They didn't know it, but they were remembering Thera. Not through data or science, but through legend. Plato's Atlantis wasn't born from nowhere. It was born here from fire and water. The Aegean became the cradle of both civilization and its favourite myth. Disasters like this remind us how fragile we are, and how persistent. The people who fled Thera might have thought their world was gone forever. But centuries later, their stories found new shapes, new languages, new names. Maybe that's the real secret of Atlantis. It's not a place that sank. It's an idea that refused to drown. And honestly, if volcanoes had Yelp reviews, Thera's would be something like, spectacular views, terrible experience, would not recommend eruption season. But even then, there's awe behind the fear, because when you stand at the edge of that caldera today, looking into the deep blue, you realise this is the sea's memory made visible, a story written in smoke and stone. So much of history is loud, kings, battles, conquests. But here, beneath the quiet waves of the Aegean, lies a story that whispers, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations can vanish and still leave beauty behind. The fire is out now, the sea has cooled, but the story isn't over. Because centuries later, explorers, divers and dreamers would come searching for answers, hoping to find Atlantis in sonar scans and broken stones. And every time they did, they'd hear the same soft voice of the ocean saying, "Look deeper." Join me next as we follow them, from the myths of Greece to the maps of modern science. In Chapter 7, Searching the Depths. The fire is gone now. The waves have quieted, but they haven't forgotten. For centuries, they've kept their secrets buried beneath blue silence. And like all good secrets, the longer they sleep, the louder they call. Somewhere down in that endless dark, a story waits. Part truth, part dream. And humans being humans can't resist a mystery. So we did what we always do. We started to look. What if I told you that we've mapped the surface of Mars better than we've mapped our own ocean floor? It's true. We've sent probes past Jupiter, but there are parts of the Aegean we still haven't seen. That's why, even now, the idea of Atlantis feels possible. Because when you stare into the deep, you can't help but wonder, what's still down there? Long before sonar and submarines, explorers were already obsessed. In the 1800s, amateur adventurers scoured the Mediterranean, convinced they could spot marble ruins through the waves if they squinted hard enough. They brought ropes, compasses, and optimism, usually in that order. Then came the 20th century when science joined the hunt. Archaeologists, geologists, and oceanographers turned myth into a hypothesis. If Plato's story had any truth, they reasoned, the evidence should be on the seafloor. And so the modern search began. Fast forward a few decades, now we have sonar. It's like echolocation for the sea. We send a pulse of sound down and it bounces back, painting a picture of what lies below. Mountains, ridges, even shipwrecks, all revealed through echoes. Add submersibles, drones and satellite scanning, and suddenly the ocean floor isn't so mysterious. We can see ancient riverbeds, collapsed volcanoes, and what looks suspiciously like walls. Or, just rocks that got lucky with lighting. That's the tricky part. The sea loves to tease. One scan looks like a lost city, the next looks like a pile of stones. Atlantis, it seems, knows how to play hard to get. Over the years, the where of Atlantis has become a kind of global scavenger hunt. Some say it's right here, in the Aegean, beneath Santorini's caldera. Others swear it's off the coast of Spain, near the Straits of Gibraltar. A few think it's under Antarctica, frozen in time. And then there are the bold dreamers who say it lies beneath the Atlantic itself, waiting beyond the horizon. The funny part, every one of them sounds convincing after 10 minutes of YouTube. That's the magic of a good legend. It fits wherever we need it to. But among all the wild guesses, something remarkable has happened. The search for Atlantis actually helped science. To prove or disprove the myth, explorers mapped huge portions of the ocean floor. In the process, they discovered undersea volcanoes, fault lines, and ancient coastlines that changed how we understand Earth itself. So even if we never find Atlantis, the hunt has already paid off. The myth led us to truth, just not the one we expected. Still, the human part of the story is my favourite. There's something charmingly universal about standing on a beach, pointing at the horizon, and saying, "It's out there somewhere." Generations of scientists have done just that. With better equipment, sure, but the same gleam in their eyes. And you can't really blame them. The ocean is the best magician we know. It hides everything. And occasionally lets something shine through just to keep us hooked. Every few years someone claims to have found proof. A photo, a sonar map, a satellite image of strange patterns on the seabed. Rectangles, lines, maybe even a city grid. And for a moment the world gets excited. Headlines shout, "Atlantis found." Then scientists double-check and quietly cough. Usually it turns out to be a natural formation, or in one case, a digital glitch from Google Earth. But here's the thing, even when those theories fall apart, the dream doesn't. because we want Atlantis to exist. We need it to exist. It keeps the world just mysterious enough to stay interesting. Every expedition into the deep is really an expedition into ourselves. The divers chasing ruins are also chasing meaning, proof that we're connected to something older, grander, and still out there. Maybe that's why the story endures, because Atlantis isn't just about the past, it's about us and our refusal to stop looking for wonder. Sometimes when sonar scans show nothing but rock and mud, I imagine the ocean chuckling softly, like an old storyteller protecting its secrets. Maybe it's saying, "You're asking the wrong question." Maybe the real Atlantis isn't a city at all. Maybe it's a symbol for everything we lose and try to find again. Wisdom, balance, memory. The sea doesn't need to hide gold or temples. It hides reminders. We've searched the depths. We've followed the echoes. But what if Atlantis isn't in one place at all? What if it's everywhere, scattered through the myths of many lands, reborn in every culture that ever dreamed of a world lost beneath the waves? In the next chapter, we drift beyond Greece, into the dream geography of legends. From the Atlantic to Antarctica, we'll explore every corner where the story of Atlantis has found a new home. Join me in Chapter 8, Atlantis Everywhere. We've searched the depths of the Aegean. We've followed sonar echoes, sifted through ruins, and stared into volcanic craters. But the story of Atlantis didn't stay there. It drifted, like a message in a bottle, across oceans and centuries. Everywhere humans found water, they found reflections of Atlantis waiting beneath it. What if Atlantis was never one place, but many? A story that changes its face depending on who's telling it. A mirror for every culture that's ever looked into the deep and whispered, "Something was lost here." Let's start where most people still point, west across the Atlantic. When European explorers began crossing these waters, they carried Plato's story with them. They believed that somewhere beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, lay the remains of a vanished land. Some even claimed the New World itself was Atlantis reborn. The Azores, the Bahamas, even Cuba, all proposed as the true site. Maps from the 1500s show a mysterious island labelled Atlantis floating where no island existed. Of course, sailors didn't find marble temples or golden statues, but they did find civilizations, Mayans, Aztecs, Incas, advanced and ancient in their own right. And for a while, Europeans tried to explain that by saying, they must be descendants of Atlantis. A convenient idea, and a very wrong one, but it shows how far the myth had travelled, across the world, across purpose, and across meaning. Now look north, to Iceland, Greenland, and the edge of the Arctic. Here legends speak of drowned lands beneath cold seas. The Celts told stories of High Brazil, a phantom island that appeared once every 7 years off the coast of Ireland. Sailors swore they saw its green hills through the mist, but it always vanished before they could reach it. Sound familiar? Atlantis by another name, fleeting, beautiful, unreachable. In Norse sagas, the sea is also alive with memory. They spoke of lands swallowed by ice and waves, echoes of real floods and changing shorelines after the Ice Age. Even in the far north, where nights are long and the sea is steel, the idea of lost worlds survived. And then there's the strangest theory of all, that Atlantis lies under Antarctica. In the 20th century, some fringe writers claimed the continent wasn't always frozen. They believed ancient maps, like the Piri Reis map of 1513, showed Antarctica's coastline ice-free, suggesting it was once home to a great civilization, before a sudden shift buried it under snow. Science disagrees, of course, but still, it's hard not to shiver a little at the image. Marble temples locked beneath glaciers, waiting for the ice to melt and reveal them. There's a poetic symmetry to that idea. A legend trapped in time, preserved by the cold. It may not be true, but it's the kind of story that makes the imagination hum. Head east now, far from the Atlantic, across the deserts and jungles. In India, the ancient text Mahabharata describes Dwarka, a golden city said to have sunk beneath the waves after a divine war. Divers off the coast of modern-day Gujarat have even found ruins, temples, walls, streets, swallowed by the sea thousands of years ago. In Japan, fishermen tell of Yonaguni, strange underwater terraces that look eerily man-made. Scholars debate whether they're natural formations or remnants of an ancient settlement. Either way, the ocean has turned them into a dreamscape, another Atlantis waiting to be named. Even in the Americas, myths speak of lost lands. The Hopi talk about Cascara, a world before this one, destroyed by floods. The Maya wrote of cities that vanished underwater and were reborn in the next age. Atlantis isn't a story. It's a pattern. Everywhere you look, someone remembers a paradise lost to the sea. It's like the ocean has the world's worst reputation for housekeeping. Oops, another city. My bad. If Poseidon had a customer service line, it'd be permanently on hold, but the laughter hides something deeper. We keep telling these stories because we all understand what it means to lose, to see something we love disappear, and to hope it might still exist somewhere, just out of reach. So maybe Atlantis isn't about geography at all. Maybe it's the human story retold through waves and ruins, the idea that beauty can vanish but not be forgotten. Each version, from Dwarka to High Brazil, from the Aegean to the Arctic, speaks the same truth. Civilizations rise, fall, and leave behind silence. And in that silence we plant myths like lanterns in the dark. If you close your eyes right now and listen to the sea, really listen, it's easy to imagine that somewhere beneath the sound of the waves, those cities still hum faintly. Not in stone or marble, but in memory. Atlantis is everywhere because it lives in the one place that never sinks. Our imagination. We've chased Atlantis across the map, from myths to maps, from poetry to sonar. But maybe the real question isn't where Atlantis was. Maybe it's why we need it to exist. Next, we'll dive into the human mind, into our psychology, our nostalgia, and our fascination with what's lost. Because before you can find Atlantis in the sea, you have to find it in yourself. Join me for Chapter 9, The Psychology of Lost Worlds. We've chased Atlantis across oceans and maps, through myths and sonar scans, but now we turn inward. Because before Atlantis ever existed in story or stone, it existed in the mind. Every lost world begins there, in the quiet space between memory and imagination. Why do we love stories of lost cities? Why does every generation dream of something that once was? A golden age, a vanished paradise, a home beneath the waves. Maybe because deep down, we all feel a little lost too. Human beings are wired for curiosity. We don't like empty spaces. Not on maps, not in stories, not in ourselves. So when we find one, we fill it. When the first explorers sailed beyond the horizon, they didn't find dragons, but they expected to. Because mystery is more exciting than blankness. Atlantis gives us that. A mystery that never ends. No matter how much we learn, it always stays one step ahead. There's also something beautifully nostalgic about the idea of a lost world. It whispers to us, things used to be better, simpler, more magical. Even if it's not true, the thought brings comfort, like looking at old photos through a fogged-up window. Every culture has its own before time. The Garden of Eden, the Golden Age, the dreaming, the first world. Atlantis fits right in, the symbol of everything perfect that slipped away. It's not just history we're missing, it's innocence. But there's another reason Atlantis sticks. A darker one. It's the fear of collapse, the quiet awareness that nothing we build is permanent. Every empire, every city, every generation thinks it's special. Until the tide comes in, Atlantis reminds us that even the greatest achievements can vanish overnight. That's scary, yes, but it's also strangely comforting, because it means that loss is natural. Not failure, just part of the rhythm. The sea takes, the sea gives. If you think about it, our species has a funny relationship with the apocalypse. We tell stories about the end of the world to relax. People fall asleep listening to the fall of empires. You're doing it right now. But that's the magic of bedtime history. It lets us face our fears from a safe distance, wrapped in soft sound and low light. We can explore the end of worlds without losing our own. Carl Jung, and the psychologist who loved myths almost as much as philosophers did, once said that ancient stories are dreams of the collective mind. Atlantis is one of those dreams. It reflects what we believe about ourselves. When we're proud, we imagine Atlantis as a perfect city, wise, advanced, peaceful. When we're anxious, we see it as a warning, a mirror of our hubris, technology, and greed. It's a myth that shapeshifts with our mood. That's why it never fades. There's a rhythm to how we remember. A rise, a fall, a longing. You see it in history, art, even pop culture. We romanticize the past, worry about the present, and dream about the future. Atlantis ties all three together. It's a story about what was, what is, and what might be again. It's not really about ruins at all, it's about return. Have you ever noticed how memories feel a bit like the sea? They shift, they shimmer, they hide things. Sometimes you find something clear, a smell, a sound, a moment, shining through the surface. Other times, you dive down and all you find is silt. Atlantis lives in that space, half remembered, half imagined. It's less about a city we lost and more about the feeling of loss itself. That's what makes it timeless. Even when we know the story might not be real, we still search, because we're not just looking for a city, we're looking for connection, to our ancestors, to mystery, to meaning. The ocean reminds us that there's more out there than we can ever see. And that's strangely comforting too. It means there are still stories left to tell. Sometimes I think if Atlantis ever really did rise from the sea, we'd probably just argue about zoning laws and parking. But deep down, we'd also feel awe, because it would mean we were right, that the world still holds wonders. And isn't that what we secretly hope for? That there's more to life than what we can measure or explain? So maybe Atlantis isn't a place waiting to be found. Maybe it's a feeling waiting to be understood. That pull toward the past. That ache for what we've lost and might never get back. We call it myth, but it's really memory. And like all memories, it changes each time we tell it. Maybe that's what keeps it alive. We've explored the mind's version of Atlantis, the dream that lives inside us. Now let's return to the real ocean and listen to what it has to say. Because sometimes the sea doesn't just hold silence. Sometimes it speaks. Join me for Chapter 10, The Sound of the Deep. We've spent time wandering through the mind, the memory of Atlantis, the dream we all seem to share. Now let's return to the ocean itself. The waves are still waiting, humming quietly, like a record spinning beneath the static. If you listen long enough, you'll notice the sea isn't silent, it speaks, just not in a language we easily understand. What if the ocean could talk? What if, beneath the crash of waves and the hiss of tide, there was a voice, a low ancient sound, telling the story of everything it's seen? The truth is, it already does. We just had to learn how to listen. To us, the deep sounds empty. But to whales, submarines, and curious scientists, it's alive with vibration. Whale songs drift for hundreds of miles. Earthquakes boom like drums through the crust. Even a distant storm can send ripples of sound that echo for days. Every movement down there makes noise. Tiny shrimp clicks, the grinding of shifting rock, the faint metallic hum of passing ships. Together they form what oceanographers call the soundscape, the constant living heartbeat of the sea. If you could hear it all at once, it would sound less like chaos and more like an orchestra tuning before a timeless concert. How we listen. In the 1960s, during the Cold War, scientists dropped microphones, hydrophones, into the deepest parts of the ocean. They weren't looking for whales, they were listening for submarines. Instead, they found something far stranger. Long, low moans, rhythmic thumps, echoes that seemed to come from nowhere, and sometimes everywhere. At first they thought it was mechanical, then biological, then they simply labelled it unidentified. The most famous of these sounds is called the bloop, a mysterious deep ocean noise recorded in 1997. It was loud enough to be heard across the Pacific. For years, people said it was proof of something enormous down there, maybe even a living thing. Later, researchers traced it to icequakes, massive chunks of Antarctic glacier breaking apart. But by then the idea had already drifted into legend, because, let's be honest, giant ice noise just doesn't fire the imagination quite like ancient sea monster. I always imagine Poseidon rolling his eyes at this point. Seriously, you break one continent and everyone thinks it's a creature. But in a way, those mysteries serve a purpose. They remind us the ocean isn't empty, it's just private. Sound travels farther underwater than in air. 5 times faster, in fact. It can linger, bouncing off canyon walls and drifting through trenches for hours. That means, in a very literal sense, the sea remembers. Every explosion, every whale song, every piece of falling rock, they all leave vibrations woven into its depths. A kind of acoustic archaeology. If Atlantis ever existed, the sea would still be carrying the echo of its last breath. maybe not as words, but as a tremor, somewhere in the dark. There's something deeply human about leaning close to the unknown and saying, "Tell me." Ocean scientists, artists, even insomniacs. We all listen to the deep for the same reason. We want to feel less alone. The low hum of the ocean connects us to everything, to volcanoes under the crust, to whales in migration, to ships gliding thousands of miles away. It's the planet's background music, steady, patient, endless. And maybe that's why we find it soothing. Because somewhere in that sound, there's proof that the world keeps going, even when we stop to rest. Imagine yourself floating just beneath the surface. Light filters down like slow rain. The water presses gently against your ears, and all you can hear is the low pulse of the earth. That's what eternity sounds like. Not loud, not grand, just steady. It's humbling and comforting. Because for all our noise up here, the ocean below remains calm, ancient, unchanged. When Plato wrote of the island that fell into the sea, maybe this is what he meant. Not that it was lost, but that it became part of something larger, a chorus of sound and memory. Every crash of wave over rock is another retelling of that story. Every echo a reminder that nothing ever truly disappears. We just stop hearing it for a while. And somewhere, perhaps, a whale swims over the ruins, humming a tune older than language. Maybe that's the real voice of Atlantis. Not in ruins or relics, but in song. The ocean is often called silent, but it isn't. It's speaking all the time. We're just learning to listen. And if you close your eyes tonight, maybe you'll catch a fragment of that sound. A long, low note that has been playing since before we walked on land. That's not imagination. That's history. Humming through water, we've heard the sea's voice. Its whispers, its warnings, its songs. But not everyone listens the same way. Some chase the mystery their whole lives, diving deeper into obsession. Next, we meet them. The dreamers, the scholars, and the seekers who dedicated everything to finding Atlantis. Join me in Chapter 11, The Scholars and the Seekers. The sea has a voice. We've heard its whispers and echoes, but there are some who wanted more than whispers. They wanted answers. For centuries, men and women, scholars, explorers, dreamers, have stared at the horizon and thought, if Atlantis existed, I'll be the one to find it. Some search with science, some search with faith, and some with nothing but a compass, a notebook, and a wild imagination. What drives a person to dedicate their whole life to something that might not exist? Is it obsession, curiosity, or maybe a quiet hope that finding Atlantis will somehow explain who we are? Whatever it is, it's powerful enough to fill libraries, sink ships, and spark 1,000 arguments. It began in the Renaissance, that glorious time when curiosity and confidence both ran high. Europe had rediscovered Plato, and with him, his mysterious island. Suddenly, every scholar with a map and a sense of adventure became a detective of the deep. Some saw Atlantis as a historical puzzle. Others saw it as a spiritual truth, a paradise lost because of human sin. And a few more romantic souls saw it as the ultimate treasure hunt. One early writer even claimed the pyramids of Egypt were built by Atlantean refugees. Another swore he could see ruins just off the coast of Spain, though, conveniently, only at low tide and after 2 glasses of wine. Fast forward to the late 1800s and we meet one of the great champions of the legend, Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman turned philosopher, turned full-time myth enthusiast. In 1882, he published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, a massive book that basically said, Plato was right and I can prove it. Donnelly believed Atlantis was the mother civilization of all others, the source of Egyptian, Mayan, and even Norse cultures. His logic was ambitious, to say the least, but his writing, magnetic. He had that mix of confidence and wonder that makes you almost believe him, even when the evidence is paper thin. And he wrote with a sense of awe, that the ocean might still be hiding the blueprint of humanity itself. For better or worse, Donnelly made Atlantis mainstream again. Before him, it was a myth. After him, it was a movement. Then came Arthur Evans, the archaeologist who actually found something real. In the early 1900s, he uncovered the ruins of Knossos on Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization. When news broke, the world gasped. A lost civilization, thousands of years old, filled with art and mystery, just like Atlantis. Reporters couldn't resist. Headlines shouted, "Atlantis found." Evans himself never claimed that, of course. He was a scholar, not a showman. But his discovery gave the legend a backbone, proof that myths sometimes grow from real roots. And once again, people started to wonder, if the Minoans were real, what else might be? The 20th century brought sonar, scuba and satellites, and with them, a new generation of seekers. Jacques Cousteau dove into the Aegean, scanning the seafloor near Santorini. He didn't find Atlantis, but he did find ruins, pottery, and fragments of the past, reminders that the sea keeps more than secrets. Later came divers off Spain, geologists in the Azores, even researchers in the Sahara. Everyone was sure they were this close, and honestly, that's the charm of the whole thing, because the search for Atlantis is less about finding it and more about looking for it. The process is the point. Of course, not everyone played by the rules of science. Some seekers went full fantasy. They claimed Atlantis was powered by crystals, or built by aliens, or connected to the lost continent of Lemuria through secret tunnels. You know, just the usual. And while most of those theories crumble under scrutiny, there's still something almost touching about them. A belief that somewhere, hidden from sight, lies a world that got it right. Peaceful, wise, advanced, harmonious. Maybe that's what we're really searching for. Not ruins, but reassurance. If you've ever fallen down an internet rabbit hole about Atlantis at 2 a.m, you're in good company. Donnelly did it with quills and candles. You're just faster. But the feeling's the same. That electric sense of maybe it's out there. Maybe the next clue will make it real. The scholars and seekers remind us of something essential. Curiosity is its own kind of faith. Even if Atlantis never rises from the sea, the act of searching keeps the story alive. It's human to wonder. It's human to hope. And in that hope, we build bridges between myth and memory. Maybe that's why every generation has its Atlanteans, people who chase beauty through the unknown. So when you think of Atlantis, don't just picture ruins underwater. Picture all the people who've spent lifetimes listening for its call. Philosophers, explorers, scientists, dreamers. Each one in their own way became part of the legend. Each one added a verse to the same old song. Because Atlantis isn't just a place. It's a question we keep asking the sea, and maybe ourselves. We've heard the stories, the science, and the seekers. Now it's time to turn inward again, to ask what all of it means. Is Atlantis history or memory? A city or a symbol? Join me for Chapter 12, Between Myth and Memory, where we sail into the quiet waters between truth and imagination. The seekers have put away their maps, the scholars have closed their books, the divers have surfaced, and the waves have swallowed their bubbles. Now, only the story remains, drifting somewhere between what we know and what we remember. This is where Atlantis truly lives. Not beneath the sea, not on any map, but between myth and memory. What if every myth was just history seen through a dream? What if every memory was a story trying to find its shape? Atlantis might be both. Too real to be dismissed, too unreal to be proven. It lingers in that soft twilight where fact fades and imagination begins to glow. Myth isn't a lie, it's a language. One the heart understands even when the mind doesn't. The ancients didn't tell myths to deceive. They told them to explain, to remember, to heal. When a flood destroyed their home, they turned pain into poetry. When a volcano erupted, they turned terror into a tale about angry gods. It was their way of saying, we saw something too big for words. And maybe that's what Atlantis was, a way to describe something too vast to comprehend. The loss of a world, the fragility of everything we build. Memory is tricky. It changes every time we visit it. What we call remembering is really rewriting. Ask 10 people to recall the same event, and you'll get 10 different versions, all true in their own way. Now imagine those memories passed down for thousands of years, stories told by grandmothers by firelight, by sailors under stars, by philosophers in marble halls. Each one adds something, loses something, reshapes the tale to fit the moment. By the time Plato wrote it down, Atlantis might have been 1,000 memories stitched together into one perfect myth. Even if Atlantis never existed in stone, it exists in feeling, because everyone knows what it means to lose something. A home, a place, a person, a time that will never come again. That's what gives the story its power. Atlantis isn't just the city that sank, it's the friend who drifted away, the golden summer that ended too soon, the version of us that we can't quite return to, and that's why it hurts a little, and comforts us too. If you think about it, humans are the only creatures who turn nostalgia into architecture. We build monuments for things that might never have happened, pyramids of memory stacked on top of each other. And we visit them, again and again, whispering, maybe this time we'll remember it right. The sea must think we're adorable. Science, of course, wants clarity, dates, evidence. But stories like Atlantis remind us that truth isn't always a straight line. The Thera eruption was real. The Minoans were real. Their fall left a scar across the Aegean, and humans filled that scar with story. Over time, the line between witness and imagination blurred until there was no line left. It's not deception, it's evolution. That's how stories survive, by adapting to what the next listener needs to hear. In a way, we're still doing the same thing. Our myths just have Wi-Fi now. Atlantis became science fiction, then cinema, then philosophy again. Each version says more about us than the sea. To the Victorians, Atlantis was proof of human progress, that we could rediscover our greatness. To the 20th century, it was a cautionary tale, a mirror for arrogance and collapse. And today, maybe it's a bedtime story, a peaceful reminder that even when worlds end, beauty lingers. Maybe all myths begin as memories and all memories end as myths. Somewhere in that loop, we find meaning. Atlantis teaches us that history isn't just written in books or carved in stone. It's carried in whispers, in dreams, in the quiet ache for something just out of reach. The line between truth and legend isn't a wall, it's a shoreline. And like any shoreline, the tide keeps moving it. I sometimes imagine that if the ocean could talk, it would sound amused. Maybe it would say, "You've been telling this story for 2,000 years and you're still not tired of it." And maybe we'd answer, "No," because every time we tell it, we find something new about ourselves. Atlantis may be gone, but the need for it never will be, because we'll always crave stories that explain the unexplainable, that let us grieve, hope, and dream all at once. The truth isn't at the bottom of the sea. It's in the telling. We've wandered through the spaces between memory and myth. Now let's return to the surface, to the modern world that still sleeps above the ruins. In the next chapter, we walk through Santorini at night, the island that might be Atlantis' reflection, and listen to its quiet ghosts. Join me for chapter 13, The Ghosts of the Aegean. The myths fade, the memories drift, and now the world sleeps again in Thera, though not entirely. Somewhere above the same sea that swallowed the old world, lights flicker across whitewashed walls. This is Santorini, once Thera, a crescent of cliffs wrapped around a deep blue scar. By day it's a postcard, by night it's a whisper. If you listen closely you might hear them, the ghosts of the Aegean. Imagine walking through the narrow lanes of Oia after midnight. The tourists are gone. The air smells of salt, jasmine and stone still warm from the sun. Below the cliffs the sea breathes, in and out, as it has for thousands of years. You can almost feel the island remembering. Santorini wears history like a second skin. Every layer of paint covers another story. Every step echoes with something older. People drink wine here, laugh, fall in love, all while standing on the rim of an ancient volcano. They take photos of sunsets without realizing they're watching light fall over one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. It's strange, isn't it? How beauty can grow from disaster. Maybe that's the real magic of this place. That life came back, quietly, as if to prove that even the god's anger can't last forever. The old city of Akrotiri still sleeps beneath its ash. Frescoes of dolphins, gardens, and golden rooms perfectly preserved. Archaeologists move carefully, brushing away centuries with tiny tools, uncovering the colours of a lost world inch by inch. They say that when they first opened one of the rooms, the smell of the ancient air still lingered, trapped since the day the volcano erupted. That same air, from 1600 BC, still existed for a moment before escaping into ours. That's the kind of thing that makes you stop and breathe differently. The people who live here now don't talk much about Atlantis. They talk about weather, ferries, crops, and the price of olives, the real stuff of life. But every now and then, when the sea goes quiet, you'll see someone pause, staring out at the dark water, as if expecting something to rise. Not fear, just recognition. Because even if they don't believe in Atlantis, they live with its memory. The cliffs, the caldera, the tremors that still roll through the island on restless nights. They're reminders that history never stays buried for long. And honestly, Santorini is the only place on Earth where you can sip cold white wine while sitting on the edge of a prehistoric explosion and call it romantic. You have to admire that level of optimism. At night, the island hums softly. Wind moves through alleys like whispers passing between centuries. Church bells ring out across the cliffs, their sound drifting over the caldera like a heartbeat. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll hear the waves breaking far below, that deep rhythmic sound that feels less like water and more like time itself moving. It's easy to imagine the people who once stood here, merchants, sailors, priests, their voices carried away by the same wind. Maybe that's what ghosts really are. Not spirits, but echoes that never finish their sentence. Santorini is old in ways that are hard to measure. It's been built, buried, and rebuilt so many times that the past and present have become neighbours. You can rent a room with Wi-Fi and sleep above Bronze Age ruins. There's something humbling about that. A reminder that we're all just temporary tenants on borrowed ground. History isn't behind us, it's beneath us. But despite everything, eruptions, earthquakes, collapse, the island still glows. People live, love, argue, sing. Children play on the same stones where others once fled. It's proof that even the worst endings can lead to quiet rebirths. That beauty can grow from ash. That life somehow keeps finding its way back to the surface. And maybe that's why Atlantis never feels like a tragedy. It feels like a reminder that what's gone isn't really gone. It just changed shape. When you stand at the edge of the caldera and watch the moon ripple across the water, you realise how little separates the living from the remembered. The waves below are the same ones that carried the Minoans, the same ones that erased them, and the same ones that now rock the tourist ferries each morning. It's all the same ocean, just different stories floating on top. The ghosts of the Aegean don't haunt. They simply remind, softly, patiently, that everything ends and everything begins again. If you listen closely, you'll hear them in the wind, not saying remember me, but look how far you've come. Maybe that's what peace sounds like. We've walked through the ruins of memory and stood on the edge of time, but there's still one lesson left in Atlantis' story. One final truth it's been trying to tell us all along. Next, we explore what that truth means for us today. Not as myth, not as history, but as wisdom. Join me for Chapter 14, The Lesson of Atlantis. We leave Santorini's moonlit cliffs behind now. The ghosts of the Aegean fall silent, and the sea stretches out before us again, wide, endless, patient. For thousands of years, Atlantis has been a mystery we've tried to solve. But maybe it was never meant to be solved. Maybe it was meant to be understood. What if the real treasure of Atlantis wasn't gold or crystal towers, but a lesson? A quiet truth about the rise and fall of all things. Even us. Every story endures for a reason. And Atlantis, like the tide itself, keeps returning because we still need to hear what it's trying to say. When Plato first told the story, he wasn't writing an adventure. He was writing a mirror. Atlantis, he said, fell because its people grew proud. Too clever, too powerful, too certain of their own perfection. They forgot balance. They forgot humility. And in that forgetting, they destroyed themselves. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Every civilization eventually faces its own reflection in the water. History loves patterns. Empires rise like waves, full of promise, bright and strong. Then they crest, break and fade. The sea smooths their ruins, and a new wave takes shape. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Minoans, all great, all gone. Atlantis might just be the name we give to that cycle, the one we can't escape, but might still learn from. If you think about it, humans have a pretty short memory. Every generation says, this time will be different, while building on the same fault lines. It's like rearranging deck chairs on a mythological ship. But maybe the point isn't to stop the tide. Maybe it's to surf it better. Atlantis' fall isn't just a warning about power. It's about imbalance between knowledge and wisdom, between growth and gratitude. The Atlanteans, according to Plato, were brilliant. They built cities of wonder and mastered the seas. But they forgot that progress without humility is just another kind of destruction. And that's the part that still feels relevant today. We have our own Atlantean tools Technology, science, invention. We can touch the stars, but sometimes we forget to look down at the earth beneath our feet. In a way, our world isn't so different. We build towers that touch the sky, devices that shrink the planet, and networks that never sleep. But we also face floods, fires, and rising seas. Reminders that nature doesn't negotiate. Maybe the myth keeps resurfacing because we keep repeating it. Atlantis isn't history repeating itself. It's humanity doing it. Still, there's beauty in the trying. For every collapse, there's rebuilding. For every mistake, a rediscovery. That's the second lesson of Atlantis. Resilience. The sea may take, but it also gives back. Every end leaves something behind for the next beginning. And maybe that's why we're drawn to the story. Because even when it ends in tragedy, it still whispers hope. If a world can be lost, maybe one can also be found again. I sometimes wonder if Atlantis was never a city at all, but a metaphor for us. For the part of humanity that keeps reaching too far, dreaming too big, loving the world so much that we risk losing it. But also for the part that never gives up trying again. That's the paradox. Our greatest strength and our greatest flaw share the same heartbeat. If the story of Atlantis teaches us anything, it's this: that wisdom isn't in knowing where the city sank, but in understanding why it fell. Civilizations, like people, need balance between ambition and restraint, pride and humility, memory and progress. Atlantis fell when that balance broke. We stay afloat by remembering it. And maybe, just maybe, if Atlantis could send us a message from the depths tonight, it wouldn't be a warning at all. It would just say, relax, we made the same mistakes. You'll be fine. If you learn to listen. The legend ends, but its rhythm continues. Like waves, eternal and forgiving. Every generation will rediscover Atlantis in its own way, tell it again, reshape it again, until the story becomes part of who we are. Because the real Atlantis isn't the city that sank. It's the lesson that rose. We've heard the story, the myth, and the meaning. Now all that's left is silence, the kind that holds everything we've learned. Join me for the final chapter, where the story comes full circle, where the waves fall quiet, and we remember what the sea has been trying to tell us all along. Chapter 15. The sea remembers. The story is almost done. The fires have gone out. The ruins are silent. Only the sea remains, vast, unhurried, unending. Everything that ever was the name, the laughter, the music, the fear, the hope. It all returns here in time. Because the sea remembers. If the ocean could dream, what do you think it would remember? Not ships or sailors or maps, but moments. The rise and fall of worlds, the small sounds of life that once echoed above it. The sea keeps them all. Tucked away in its deep blue folds, it forgets nothing. For as long as there has been land, there has been the sea, watching quietly while mountains rose and empires fell. It was there before Atlantis, before the first story, before the first word, and it will still be there after us. That might sound sad, but it isn't. It's comforting. To know that something endures. The sea doesn't judge, it doesn't mourn, it just remembers. Every wave that touches the shore has been here before. It's the same water that once washed over Minoan ports, filled the canals of Venice, carried ships to war and peace alike. We think of history as a line, forward, unstoppable. But the sea knows better. It moves in circles, just like memory, just like us. Maybe that's why we find it so calming. When we listen to the waves, we're hearing time itself repeating softly. You've been here before and you'll be here again. Every civilization leaves something behind. Sometimes it's stone, sometimes it's sound. Sometimes it's just an idea that refuses to sink. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, became all three. A ruin without location, a song without words, a memory that outlived its makers. That's the strange mercy of the sea. It erases and preserves at the same time. It took the island but left the story. You could say the ocean has the best filing system in the world. Everything goes in, nothing comes out. But somehow it still keeps track of where it put things. When we tell the story of Atlantis, we're not really talking about an island. We're talking about ourselves, our hopes, our fears, our fragile brilliance. The sea becomes a mirror, showing us both beauty and consequence. We can't live without it, and yet we never quite understand it. Maybe that's the point. Mystery is the thread that keeps wonder alive. The ocean teaches patience. It moves slowly, but it gets everywhere eventually. It teaches balance between creation and destruction. And it teaches humility, that no matter how powerful we become, we're still guests here. Atlantis forgot that lesson. We can't afford to. Take a moment now, close your eyes, listen. Somewhere you can hear it, the rhythm of the tide, the sound of the world remembering itself. That sound has never stopped. It's the same one your ancestors heard, and the same one someone will hear long after we're gone. That's not loss, that's continuity. It's easy to feel small standing before the ocean, but that smallness isn't insignificance. It's connection. We're made of the same water, the same salt, the same elements that once swirled through ancient seas. When we return to the ocean, we're not leaving home. We're going back to it. And maybe that's what the sea remembers most. Not our empires or monuments, but our touch. Every footprint that's washed away. Every hand that's reached into the tide. Every whisper carried across the waves. It remembers the living. It remembers us. Atlantis may be gone, but the ocean keeps telling its story. Softly. Endlessly. Not as tragedy, but as reminder. That what we build matters. That what we love endures. That even when the tide takes everything, it leaves behind the promise of return. The sea remembers because remembering is what keeps the world alive. And so, as you drift into sleep tonight, let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let the water carry your thoughts. Calm, slow, timeless. The story of Atlantis isn't over. It's still being written. In you, in me, in every sound the sea makes against the shore. Because nothing is ever truly lost. Not to time, not to memory, not to the sea. Good night, and may the tides be kind.